So the last session, as I mentioned, is on IntelaTrac mobile operator rounds. So if you hear me say mobile operator rounds or IntelaTrac, just know that those names are interchangeable. Close out of this and pull up my PowerPoint. So just to kind of touch over high level of what IntelaTrac is a software solution aimed at digitizing manual data entry. And typically, it's a round of some sort where, in the past, operators or field workers go around with paper and pen, or even sometimes, maybe Excel, and log those values that they go to, specific areas from the site, specifically, maybe different wells or areas within a water facility. And so one of the benefits of IntelaTrac is to, first of all, digitize that process, right? Digitizing that entry allows for, a clean aggregation of all that data that's being collected. So whenever you do need it, you can easily port and analyze it. You can enforce those operator round procedures in that you can make sure operators are out at those specific assets collecting that data versus I've seen kind of horror stories of or heard of horror stories where you have an operator printing out a scan of barcodes and scanning the barcodes and from his desk and writing in random numbers. And then lastly, enforcing lockout tagout procedures, and implementing maintenance work order, as well as capturing field worker knowledge. And so as the workforce gets older, or you hire on a new guy, having a digitized step-by-step instruction or workflow allows that previous knowledge to get captured in a digitized environment, versus and which allow for those new employees to be onboarded much quicker than before. And so essentially you're relying on the software to capture your knowledge and not specific individuals, whether they leave to different facilities or they retire or whatever it might be. You're relying on something that's more permanent in your facility versus individuals. So some of these industry challenges I've touched on, but the other keys of industry challenges is gaining visibility of non-instrumented equipment, right? So data that's not being captured by the SCADA system. And specifically, especially if that non-instrumented equipment is not available or accessible on the network itself. And so what the nice thing about IntelaTrac or mobile operator rounds is that that data collection can still be captured in a out of network or disconnected network from the network state. So kind of the value prop, and I'll touch on some of these, right, is I just mentioned, right, you can work within that disconnected state, support, so virtually most of your devices that you're gonna properly end up using iOS, Android, Windows 10. You don't have you eliminate the need to because of the enforcement procedures, you eliminate the need to duplicate data entry or have those other traditional practices for these rounds. And then the ability to get real-time access to the data in terms of reports and analysis. And that reports and analysis can be done through IntelaTrac itself, or it can be extended to historians, either the AVEVA historian, Cloud AVEVA Insight, or even things like OSI Pi and other EAM, integrating with other EAMs like SAP, Maximo, Infor, that sort of thing. And then, as I mentioned, the location verification, right? Whether it's RFID tags or NFC tags, enforcing, ensuring that the individual who's collecting, the data is actually reading the instrument rather than just filling out a random number. So briefly overview of the IntelaTrac suite. So you have your procedure builder, which we'll see in a second. Essentially drag and drop procedure with different actions, and we'll investigate that in a bit. Schedule manager. So not only can you, kind of, utilize your existing schedule and format in IntelaTrac, you can properly assign specific rounds to those individuals based on that associated schedule. So it's a nice schedule manager to implement your existing schedule and employ workload balancing practices. So kind of the Auditor Plus, what that is kind of like the supervisor or review tool. So as reports are either in progress or completed or done, you can review either the ongoing progress or the history of those submitted answers, and you can do some kind of initial analysis. You can see kind of they've plotted some of these values on a trend within the Auditor Plus. What we can also do is override values. So if there's an input, maybe it was a fat finger or whatever it might have been, you can override that value from here rather than having the operator recreate a round. So you can still use that same round. So there's some out-of-the-box SSRS reports, as well as with anything SSRS, you can make them configurable. And then, as I mentioned, support for iOS, Android, or Windows 10 devices. Just touching on licensing. So all licensing for IntelaTrac is based on concurrent mobile users. So essentially, it's based on the number of concurrent users you have running around in the field performing these mobile rounds. You don't have to pay for development. Even if you have 10 operators and only 2 of them at a time are doing a round, you just need 2 licenses. Now, the extensibility, as I mentioned, right, other historians, other EAM systems or solutions, and in addition to other measurement devices, whether that's temperature devices or even vibration measuring devices. So that being said, this is the only presentation where it's only available as a follow along. We haven't imported them into our SkyTap VMs yet. So I'm just running this locally. Yeah, I'm still sharing my screen. You guys can just follow along, and if you have questions, feel free, as always, to reach out. So we have our IntelaTrac VM, and so the IMC is the development environment. And so we'll log in. Admin. There we go. And we'll go ahead and double click on Procedure Builder and just get acquainted with that. So I think within, let's find it. Okay. So within this wastewater treatment plant round, we can double click this to open it up. And in the middle, we have all of our drag and drop functions, right? Task groups relate to specific assets or areas. And then tasks are those individual inputs or action items for that operator. And then you have different other things, integrate a work order request, add a message, prompt a user to put in a note, put conditional tasks, as well as adding integration to historians and adding integration with peripheral devices. If we expand this round, so what I've done is built out this round, and it's a wastewater treatment plant round. And so we have our headworks area, and this is a task group. And within this specific area, we have individual tasks. So if we minimize this, so we have our 5 tasks, and here we have a condition. And so this condition is set for, hey, after this first question, if we say no to this first question, is the Dupron, which is a piece of equipment, in auto mode? If we say no, we'll be prompted with this condition. And so you can see the no value activates this condition. It'll prompt with a message, hey, it's in manual, turn it to auto. And then a confirmation task. Okay, so now that we prompt you, is that Dupron in an auto mode? And then we finish out with our final 4 tests, with one of these integrating with the AVEVA or OneAware historian. So we can see that tag that we're integrating with. The actual integration isn't done here, it's done somewhere else. So we can go ahead and if we want to see this kind of procedure in action, we'll go ahead and close this out. And we'll save the changes that we might have made. And then here we have the light bulb with the check mark. That means the round has been released. But the light bulb next to it indicates that there's some additional information that is yet to be released, kind of similar to System Platform, where you have those black and yellow boxes next to objects indicating that there's some additional information that hasn't been deployed. So if we right-click this round and click Release, it'll just go back to that singular light bulb. And now what we can do is go into our Windows 10 VM. So here we have the app that's running. So this is kind of simulating our mobile device. So on a mobile device, you'd log in. We've already logged in here. And the first thing you do is click the sync button. And so what the sync button will do is either transfer data that you've already collected back to the IntelaTrac database, or bring in new information, whether that's been assigned procedures to my user, or maybe indicate I have some overdue procedures or any of them that I've completed. Will sync back to my device. Now that they've been essentially downloaded to my device, that device can operate fully within a disconnected state. So you can also enable procedures to be used on demand. So that's how we'll start this round. So we'll do that wastewater treatment plant round and click Assign to Me. I'll make it that task group, right? That headworks area, right? And we'll click select our options, and we'll say in service. And we can see some past values that have been inputted for this specific task group. We'll go ahead and click next, and we get those 5 options. So just like we saw in the development environment, if we click no, hey, was the Duperon in auto? We'll say no, and then we'll click next. And this specific action, or it gives us a message, right? Hey, switch it from manual to auto. Okay. So it's going to ask us to follow up, and we'll say, okay, we listened, we switched it to auto. Here's some past values. Click yes. And then it brings us to the next entry point. We'll go ahead and click yes, and you have the ability to add a note here in the top right. So we can add a note if we need to. So we'll click next. So what is the influent flow in gallons per minute? So if we put in a number, let's say 6,000, it's going to notify us that the value is out of range. And if we click on this information icon, the reason why is because, you know, when we set up this round, we expect the value to be between 0 and 5,000. So any value that's outside of that will get a notification. Now, there's 2 ways you can configure that. You can have it where the value will be prohibited to be inputted, or you can keep the warning and still allow the user to input that value. So our current configuration is the latter, so we are able to still click next. And did you empty the rag bin? We'll just say yes, and we also emptied the garbage dispenser. And so from there, we can go ahead and click the next. It'll end the procedure. We completed it, and it's in our completed section. So something to note is if we were to run it again, is 2 things. If I click in maintenance or out of service, and then click next, it immediately, there's been configuration to immediately end the procedure. If it's not running or not on, you know, there's nothing, no data to collect. So we'll click yes. And lastly, if we run it again and click in service, because of the way we have it set up, there's no enforcement of, hey, you have to put in a value. I can click through all these steps because of how it have it set up, and we'll investigate, you know, how we can, you know, further enforce that. But now we'll go ahead and sync everything back with that sync button, and then after it's synced complete, we'll go ahead and go back to our IntelaTrac database VM and view that Auditor Plus. So this Auditor Plus, if you remember from the presentation, allows you to view all you can do in progress or completed reports, or even you know, some more specific report types. So we'll go ahead and get the data. I think it's set for the last week, and we have a range of reports that we just completed. And so we have our first report. So if we were to double click this, we can see all our past the values that were inputted, and you even have the ability to override values from here. And so if I click this override section and I click override, and remember that 6,000 was too high, we'll go ahead and click override, and you know, maybe instead of 6,000 it was, you know, 4,500. I'll click save, and I've overridden that value, and I can then approve the round entirely. So I'll go ahead and approve it, and some of the other things, as I mentioned, right, you can get some historical analysis directly from this Auditor Plus. So if I click this check mark, it'll automatically populate values for those specific steps. Right? And you can view them in a table or graph view, or even export them to Excel. So if we go back, we can see, hey, you've got the data's been changed. Do you want to reload it? Yep. And once we reload it, we can see that the approved date and time and the user who approved that round. And then all the red rounds have yet to be approved. Any questions about Auditor Plus? Okay. So if we go back to the procedure builder and open up our wastewater treatment plant rounds, we'll go ahead and use the magnifying glass to expand. And remember, we want a way to enforce these rounds. And so one of those ways is within if we select the task group, Headworks, and click on Advanced, we can have these steps be required to be inputted in sequence in which they fall in line underneath that task group. In addition, we can have if we clicked on one of the steps, the tasks, and click on Advanced, we can require a value to be inputted. So if we go ahead and save and close this down and then release that report, and then go to our Windows 10 VM, we'll sync back up with the database to get that new version of the report and run the report. So now if I click in service and click next, I'm not able to, so if I skip through these, right? Because I've required that one task to be completed, it's going to be asking me, hey, you need to turn in that task. But I'm going to go ahead and actually answer all of these as well. Yep. We'll give it maybe 200. Yes. And maybe we didn't empty the garbage dumpster this time. Complete and transfer. So some of the ways that you can enforce requiring tasks to be completed, again with these peripherals like RFIDs and NFCs, you can enforce users to scan certain codes to indicate to the procedure that they are where they are. Lastly, if we expand this and click on Headworks, click on Headworks, you can assign assets to specific task groups. And the reason for that is if you have multiple rounds and maybe there's some overlap with specific assets, I don't want, one round, you want every time you record those values tied to that asset, regardless of which round I'm performing, to be collected in one spot. And so this is a way of which you can aggregate data across multiple rounds into a singular asset. That being said, I mean, integration, Other things like, requiring a note, maybe we can add a note, maybe after here, we'll say type in note. We'll save, and we'll go ahead and release the round and just show how that action item works. So we'll go back to our Windows 10, sync up, and run the round. So we'll go ahead and say in service, next. No, it was not an auto. So we have our action message, and then it prompts us to, hey, Duperon not in auto. Click add. Let me go back, and we can, okay, so now it's going to confirm, okay, yep, now it's an auto. Click yes, and then, further fill out everything. And complete the procedure and sync back up. So I think we're hitting on that 30-minute mark, near that time. Is there any questions regarding IntelaTrac? No more questions. I would like to thank you guys for your time. If you guys have stuck around, really do appreciate it. If you do end up having questions down the line about licensing, about these products, about any other products that we might have covered, maybe yesterday, please reach out to your, local account manager, myself, or anyone else on our one of our California staff. Always happy to help, and really do appreciate your time for this session. Bearing with this new virtual environment, but do really appreciate it. So I'll hang around for a couple minutes for questions. With that, wish you guys a great rest of your day. See you next time.